What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Hub of Champions. I'm part of the Believe Network, joined by Patriots beat reporter and analyst for Patriots CLNS, Taylor Kyles. I'm Shukri Wrights. Be sure to subscribe, comment, rate, and follow the podcast, and tell all the Boston sports fans to do the same. You can watch us on Believe TV across the country, airports, and on YouTube. Read the top Believe stories at si.com and follow us across all Believe socials. 2 weeks away from the NFL draft, Taylor, I know at this point your mind has got to be ready to explode. So I'll just ask you right off the bat, how are you now that we're 2 weeks away from the draft?
I'm good, man. I'm just, like you said, I'm just kind of exhausted. Like, we're looking at the quarterbacks like over and over. And I feel like we talked about every permutation so many times. There's not a whole lot of news other than maybe, the Commanders are hot on Jaden Daniels, which fingers crossed that's true because I'm a big Drake May guy. But I mean, man, still I'm doing my dream job. So I really can't complain. That said, I am very excited for the draft to get underway.
As you should be. I mean, it is the time of year where, like, normally, people talk about like who the Patriots should draft in years past. It used to be not towards the until like the end of the first not of the first round, but rather now we've gotten used to picking in the top 15, and now the Patriots will have the third overall pick. They haven't had the first overall pick since 1993. That was when they drafted Drew Bledsoe. But now, I mean, even then, that was like more than a generation ago. Like, unless if you're a certain age, who's a Patriots fan who remembers that time period. But as the Patriots get ready for the draft, exactly 2 weeks from today, I can't help but to think that once upon a time, and I'm talking for me, once upon a time, it seemed as if that there was a lock between the top three quarterbacks who will be taken in the first round: Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels. It was those three. Now, just within the last 48 hours, there's been discussions about another quarterback who could potentially be taking at number 3 by the New England Patriots. That is JJ McCarthy. To my very own personal aggravation, like, if you have seen just some of the things that he's been able to do at the combine, plus watch what he was able to do for the national champion Michigan Wolverines this past season, I don't walk away from the tape, quote unquote, feeling that this is someone who is worthy of being a franchise quarterback who is going to bring this team back into playoff contention. Taylor, when you look at JJ McCarthy and the rumblings that has been going on for the last 48 hours, my question to you is, why the sudden interest in JJ McCarthy, and what is suddenly creating this uptick in interest in McCarthy, who otherwise may fall under the second round quarterback or maybe later, but now suddenly he's potentially taking top 5 in this upcoming draft?
So I think the biggest thing that you like with McCarthy, and the thing that everybody always harps on before even the physical stuff, is the intangibles. Like, especially Dane Brugler came out with the Beast, the best draft resource out there, where he talked about how, like, when he was going to Michigan, he told the guys who were coming in with him in his class, basically, like, if you're going to be about the nonsense, like, I don't want you to come here. Do not commit to Michigan, because if you come here, we're going to work. And that's really the guy he is. He's been lauded for his leadership. That's like really the big thing about him, is that with these great quarterbacks, the common theme with them is usually they're maniacal. They are obsessed. They spend their summers. They're not going to like the beach and all the, doing all the fun stuff. They're working with trainers trying to keep their body right. They're working with their position coaches and their trainers in that respect to try to get their mechanics tightened up. Like, it's a year-round process for these guys. And I think with the Patriots, they've been harping on intangibles and leadership and guys who can really, drive this team into a new era, really from the head down. And that's really what JJ McCarthy gives you. Now, at the same time, you do need the physical tools to still be able to compete on an NFL field. And with McCarthy, I think the biggest reason that he wasn't really talked about in those discussions earlier is that he's such a projection. Obviously, when he was at Michigan, he was really the guy that they went to when they were in long yardage situations going off play action every once in a while, because their offensive line was dominant. They had a fantastic run game, and they had the best defense in the country. So honestly, like when you think about it, college sports, you'd love for it to be, you're preparing these guys for the next level and trying to build them up as players. That's not the reality. A lot of those coaches are getting paid very handsomely to win football games. So, you talk about like someone like Jaden Daniels and the LSU receivers, where it's like, oh, they didn't run a really diverse route tree. It's like, yeah, because they can run in a straight line faster than other people, and they can catch really well. Sometimes you just keep it simple. So that's what you got at Michigan. But with McCarthy, that being said, you did see in those situations like third down, he was highly efficient. He made the plays he needed to make. And also, because he didn't have that many attempts, I think it created the illusion of, oh, this guy just isn't very good. They're trying to hide him. Like I said, the arm talent is there. Now, also, he's only 21, so he's going to get bigger. He's going to get stronger. He hasn't seen a lot as a passer, so you're hoping that at the NFL level, once he gets more exposure, he's going to learn what he can and can't do. Sometimes where you don't see a lot of touch in his game, you'll see that start to develop because he's like, all right, I need to put this over linebackers, not necessarily throw a BB every time. But he attacks the full field, although there are some struggles when he throws to his left. More mechanical than anything. Those kinds of things can be fixed. But it is still a projection because you haven't seen a ton. But I will say the physical signs are encouraging. Frankly, I'd like the Patriots to take a swing at him for his upside over someone like a Jaden Daniels, who I think is more floor. I think you really know what you're going to get from him, and the improvements are kind of going to be marginal, and there's a lot of red flags that scare me. But I don't think JJ has a ton of true red flags. I think it's just, hey, if you trust your coaching staff, I don't want him over Drake May, but if Drake May's off the board and you trust your coaches to develop him and get the best out of him, I understand why he's in the conversation, but top 3 is still really rich for my blood.
It really is. And having the chance to watch some of the games, Michigan games, and I'm not going to paint the picture that I'm a college football savant, like know-it-all when it comes to college football. No, but I do watch some of the games. And I just thought that McCarthy never screamed to me as a first round draft pick. Honestly, whether if he went top 15 or the bottom 15 and so forth, I've always looked at him and said maybe second round, yeah, third round, sure, first round, that's a stretch. Top 3, nah, not really. And Michigan had, in my opinion, arguably the best offensive line in the nation last season. And when you have a good offensive line, that helps your quarterback tremendously. When you have a porous offensive line that the Patriots had last season, it was porous. Let's not sugarcoat it. It makes life a living hell for quarterbacks. Go ask Bailey Zappi and the former Patriot quarterback Mac Jones. If the Patriots are going to draft JJ McCarthy, does it frighten you that the offensive line from last season still remains intact and it's still needs work on? Because let's face it, it's still a work in progress.
It really depends on what their plan is really on the left side. I think on the right side and from the middle to the right, you're in good hands. David Andrews is still one of the better centers in the NFL. Athleticism is diminishing a little bit, but he's still one of the better options you could have. Sidney Sow at right guard, I thought was one of their best young players last season. I thought he showed a lot of flashes, especially considering they tried to pigeonhole him into the tackle spot where it was clear he was not comfortable. And then it wasn't until the season that he actually got some run at guard, got his feet under him a little bit. There were some inconsistencies, but enough flashes where I'm like, okay, with good coaching, he can become a really good player. And then obviously Mike Nwenu, who is their best player on the offense, period, I think he's going to get an entire offseason to train at right tackle, maybe shed a little bit of weight, kind of work on his technique so he's more comfortable in that spot where you saw it sometimes last season. Him being more of a guard body type worked against him, although he does have the length and typically the technique to overcome some of those deficiencies. The left side is where, it's more of a projection. I do like Chuks Okorafor, who they got from the Steelers. This is a guy who has a lot of starting experience. He's more of a pass protector than a run blocker, although he does have some nastiness in his game that I saw in film that I do like. And plus at that left tackle spot, I'd rather you be a good pass protector than a really good run blocker, whereas at the right tackle spot, pass protection's still big. You're still got to face guys like TJ Watt. Like there's good edge rushers on both sides. But right tackle, the Patriots typically like a run blocker more. And even last year you saw in Cleveland with Alex Van Pelt, he had DeJuan Jones, who's even bigger and I think a worse mover than a Mike Nwenu. So I think Chuks is going to be okay. I still want them to get at least a developmental option because Chuks is only on a one-year deal. So you're going to need somebody at that spot. I'm sure they're on the same page there because it's a one-year deal. And the biggest thing for me is Cole Strange. They did sign Nick Leverett, who was able to start a lot of games for the Buccaneers in a spot starting role, protecting Tom Brady. Left guard is kind of the position where you can get the most help on the offensive line. Typically, that's where the center slides. So he wasn't on an island very much, but I did like what I saw as a run blocker, and he didn't get beat very often in pass protection. Again, a lot of that had to do with the scheme and things like that, but he was good enough. And then you got Michael Jordan as well, who's someone who was really hyped coming out of Ohio State, had a lot of talent, hasn't really figured it out at the NFL level, but Scott Peters is a guy who worked with one of the best offensive line coaches in NFL history in Brian Callahan. Like one of the few guys you can talk about in the same breath as Dante Scarnecchia and deserves similar type of respect. Also, Scott Peters has his entire own side hustle where he helps offensive linemen with their technique. He played the position. He's really renowned for being able to develop guys in their hands and their feet. So that's a really big part of his game as well. So, you have depth at that spot, but Cole Strange, the fact that he had 2 significant knee injuries last season, you don't know how much time he's going to miss, if he's going to be able to play, how that's going to impact him. So there is definitely some significant question marks on that left side of the offensive line. I think the talent's good enough. I think Cole Strange really started to play better after his injuries as the season went on before he got hurt again. But it is undeniable that, you're probably going to have to be a run-heavy team, which is what Alex Van Pelt did in Cleveland. It was a lot of play action. It was a lot of max protection to help those guys out. He knows how to protect and cover up offensive line holes because he had to do it a lot last year for the Browns. But again, it is hard to deny that we can't really go in confident because, Chooks has never played left tackle. We don't know what's going on with Cole Strange. So, kind of a wait and see game.
You mentioned that Alex Van Pelt ran a lot of play action pass plays on when he was in Cleveland. And when I think about the NFL draft and I think about quarterbacks, and I said this for years, in which that for me, it's all about fit. How well does he fit into a system that will often determine a quarterback's success in the NFL? We see it all the time. And when it comes to the Patriots, the talk about JJ McCarthy potentially being selected at number 3 overall, and then as well as the chance that Drake May, if he's still available, he could be taking on there as well. So I'll ask you this: which quarterback would you say is better suited for this new Patriots offensive system that they're going to be running this upcoming season? Would it be JJ McCarthy or Drake May?
I would say, well, immediately, I think it's JJ because he's one of the few college quarterbacks who has extensive experience playing under center. And it's really, you can't always project how well somebody's going to adjust to that kind of thing. And especially, again, you talk about the scheme that Alex Van Pelt runs. It's not too dissimilar in terms of philosophy from what the Michigan Wolverines were doing. Although, I don't want to say that Michigan didn't push the ball downfield, but that was an emphasis with Alex Van Pelt. They love using play action to set up shots, not just those in cuts like he's trying to get vertical. Long term, I think Drake May is a guy who fits in any system. And also just because his ceiling is higher, I think if you want to start competing with the Joe Burrows and the Patrick Mahomes and the Joe Burrows of the world, did I say Joe Burrow twice? Maybe. If I did, I meant Josh Allen. But if you want to start competing with like those really elite quarterbacks, I think JJ McCarthy can still be a really good player. Like if you max him out, I still think he's got Pro Bowl potential because he's got the physical tools. He's got the work ethic to really try to get there. If you surround him with talent, I think he could be really good. I think Drake May has all pro potential. I think he could be one of those guys who is one of the better talents in the AFC. So again, short term, because JJ McCarthy understands how to play under center, again, philosophically was in an offense that was similar. Yeah, I think it'll probably work best in that type of Alex Van Pelt offense, whereas Drake May was in an air raid, which is a little more loosey-goosey with the footwork. It's more like throw to grass, whereas the West Coast offense that Alex Van Pelt has, footwork is everything because your steps are tied into where your reads are. The quarterback and receivers need to be on the same page in terms of their steps. Like that's the whole Bill Walsh thing was, you turn it into more of an art form and like a dance rather than just kind of an unstructured thing where you're going off instinct, playing off vibes. Like Drake May can play off vibes, but if you can get him in that kind of West Coast offense and teach him how to operate in efficiency and consistency, then you get, he can operate on time, but if things break down, as you saw a ton of times in college, he knows how to make guys miss, throw off platform, turn scramble drills into like bombs downfield. So I think Drake May is the best fit, period, because he's got all the tools. But again, if we're talking short-term and immediate contributions, I think JJ McCarthy is probably the best fit.
the Patriots, they have the 34th overall pick in the second round pick number 34. And they have the third round pick at number 68. And with some of the moves that has happened this season in the division, I'm starting to believe that there's going to be an extra emphasis on the protect the quarterback and also to be able to get after the quarterback. And I'm alluding to the New York Jets, who they acquired Hassan Reddick, formerly of the Philadelphia Eagles. And Hassan Reddick, I mean, say what you will, I don't know, one of the best pass rushers in the league. He's being paid to get after the quarterback. So now, given that if he stays healthy, you're going to be facing him twice a year. And I wonder if you're the Patriots and the way that you go about maybe looking at draft picks in the second round and the third round, what are you prioritizing? Are you prioritizing offensive line help, or are you prioritizing getting help, especially at the skill position, who can not only run the ball but can also work well in pass protection as well?
Yeah, really, if we're talking second round, like I want a contributor. I like guys like Kingsley Suamataia a lot. I think he's a really talented player with a high ceiling, and I'd like to see what Scott Peters can do with him. But at the same time, that's a guy who's probably not going to start his first season, whereas you could get like a receiver who at the very least could be a heavy rotational player, whether it's in design things underneath or you just try to make their life easier. It's still someone who can likely generate some big plays for you. Or, if it's like a Ricky Pearsall or a Ladd McConkey, someone who, they're not that X that the Patriots really need, but there's still someone who could probably be like a borderline starter. Whereas in that third round, that's where I think the sweet spot is for offensive line. Because I think, again, Chooks is someone who has starting experience. He can play. But if you're going to talk about, the second round where you're not really going to get anybody at offensive tackle who can start right away, get that in the third round because there is good depth, even though left tackle is kind of like X receiver where there's such rare body types and skill sets. It's hard to find those guys later in the draft. I think you can still find them. They're just not guys that can play right away. Yeah. You talk about like a Patrick Paul, someone who might be around in the third round. Even like a Roger Rosengarten, who needs to add more weight but has the tools to play both sides of the offensive line, especially if the Patriots are going to go to more of a zone-heavy scheme. I'd like to see that be the move because if you take somebody in the second round, like you can still find good receivers who, again, can be those contributors and can be at least heavy rotational players with the possibility of being starters down the road. I just don't know if the value is that great in the second round for a team that has someone who can at least start at the left tackle spot, but desperately needs an X type of wide receiver who can win outside.
When you look at the offensive staff and the way that it was constructed, head coach, on the first year head coach, Gerard Mayo, and I've heard this a lot where people are not happy way that the coaching staff has been assembled, especially on the offensive side of the ball, and people want Alex Van Pelt about what's going to be the philosophy in terms of the offense, which needs a lot of help. And so far this off season, there hasn't been like moves that have really made you say, hey, you know what, this could be a difference maker and whatnot. And I wonder, what are your thoughts on the construction of this coaching staff, especially on the offensive side of the ball? And are there any concerns that you have going into like mini camp and as well as training camp come July for like the functionality of this Patriots offense, considering how bad things were?
I am much more optimistic about this year's, especially offensive coaching staff, than I was last season. Now, you had Bill O'Brien come in, only had one coach that he had prior history actually working with, which was Will Long. He brought him from Alabama. Now he also brought Will Long over to BC. Then you talk about the offensive line coach, Adrian Clem. Somehow got hired despite the fact that he was coaching a different philosophy than what the Patriots reportedly wanted to be teaching. And then once he had to leave for health reasons, then Belichick was going back to a Skarnecchia system, and people were starting to get confused because you're learning two completely different styles. And then you look at wide receivers where Troy Brown, everybody has a ton of respect for Troy Brown. Like what he did as a player was fantastic. Seems like an outstanding individual, but receivers didn't develop well under him. And that's just kind of an undeniable fact. And if you want to argue and say, well, maybe it was up to the players and they didn't do enough or the talent wasn't good enough, not wrong. But at the same time, it is a coach's job to maximize his talent. And look where Troy Brown is. He might go to another team. He was demoted. So it's very obvious that they said, hey, if you want to stay, I'm sorry, but you're not going to be in the same role you were, which makes it pretty clear that they weren't getting enough out of him. And then you have reports of, you had coaches yelling at other coaches. You had coaches yelling at scouts saying, I don't have enough talent. And what are we doing here? And it was just a dysfunctional mess. That was a big part of why the Patriots struggled so much. Now, they had to overcome that. And there was that talent deficiency where they had huge needs on offense. And at the time, I will admit that I loved their draft picks because I liked Christian Gonzalez. I still don't back off on that. I think he's a legitimate blue chip player. I liked Keon White. I liked Marte Mapu a lot. But in retrospect, I was like, yeah, it was kind of silly of them not to address wide receiver and offensive tackle when those were glaring needs that they really should have addressed. So when you look at that whole situation last year, I don't even think it's really fair to say that this is anything similar to that. This season, it was clearly a priority for Elliott Wolf to bring in guys that he was familiar with and who are familiar with each other. That's why you see Alex Van Pelt. He's worked with Ben McAdoo, who he has experience with when he was with the Packers. You've got T.C. McCartney, the quarterbacks coach, who's someone who was in Cleveland. You have Scott Peters, was also in Cleveland. Taylor Embry is one of the few guys who doesn't have any really Patriots connections. He used to be the Jets coach. That's the only guy where I'm kind of like, I wonder how this is going to work out just because there's no ties. But if there's one position coach that you can have where, it may be someone who's not the strongest coach on your staff, probably be running backs, because it's not really something, it translates better to the NFL than a lot of other positions. And Scott Peters is someone, like I already talked about him, I'm really excited to see what he does. Tyler Hughes is another guy where he's had a lot of success in coaching, just not at the NFL level. Did work at Washington last season, and obviously the success they had, it's going to be interesting to see what perspectives he brings. But even still, he could be more of a game plan guy, whereas you get Tyquan Underwood, a guy who has playing experience, was very highly respected at Pitt, and is known more for being that technique guy. They can kind of share responsibilities there. And then even offensive line with Scott Peters, you also have Rob Kubler, who has playing experience and was very well respected as well coming in. Now, obviously, like every coach is well respected. You always hear that when these guys come in. But I think it makes sense that, one, you have a staff full of guys that Alex Van Pelt, who's running the show, has experience with. They understand what needs to be done and what they're trying to do philosophically. And then on top of that, you have a lot of the biggest, most important positions with multiple bodies there. So it's not up to just one coach. Like offensive line, wide receiver, and quarterback, those are all positions where there's probably going to be multiple guys, again, who are probably going to share the load and be able to divvy up some responsibilities. So you're not just relying on exclusively one person. So I really am excited about the direction they're going in. Obviously, it's early. We'll have to see what actually ends up happening. But I do like, at least from a philosophical perspective, that they have continuity and people who know what they're trying to get done on offense.
Absolutely. So when you look at the Patriots defense and you look at, like, especially like the front seven, like along the defensive line, and as well as like the linebackers as well. And I'm curious to see where this defense is going to be on this upcoming season, especially as we get closer to the draft and after the draft and so forth, and any moves that they may make additionally to add here. And one player you talked about on Christian Gonzalez, because like last season we all saw just how good this on this guy is, like first round draft pick out of Oregon, and one thing was cut short. And coming into this season, I wonder like what type of to ultimately like get to that next level in his growth as an NFL cornerback.
It's tough to say, honestly, but I will say he's well ahead of schedule. Like, this was somebody who came into the league with a lot of hype that was deserved, because he's got prototypical size and athleticism. So it's like, all right, physically, like, he can do this. It's not a question of if he's athletic enough. We already knew that. Yeah. And then when you looked at his tape at Oregon, like, it wasn't perfect. And there were some times where like bigger guys kind of had their way with them. We saw that with Devontae Parker when he was in training camp. Like, Devontae was catching balls on him every single day downfield just because he was so good in those 50-50 situations. And I even asked the coaches. I was like, yeah, is this something where I asked Mike Pellegrino, the cornerbacks coach, how valuable that was? And he was like, yeah, no, he gets to go up against a guy who kind of excels in an area that he needs to work on. And then Parker was giving him tips on what to work on. And then they throw him into the fire where they put him at boundary corner. And, for those who aren't familiar, the boundary corner spot is typically where you get more of your one-on-one matchups, where to the field where all the receivers are, like if it's a 3-by-1 set, sometimes you want to shift your coverage over to where the 3 receivers are and just say, hey, you're just going to cover this guy one-on-one, and then we're going to try to take away the field. He was doing very well against A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, 2 of the better receivers in the NFL. And then you look throughout the rest of the time that he played. At first, in the Miami game, he was on Jalen Waddle. Then Marcus Jones got hurt, and he went over to Tyreek Hill. Did a great job against Hill. He had safety help, didn't actually need it, was in his pocket on all of the man coverage reps that they had. And then you saw the next week against the Jets and Garrett Wilson, it's the same thing where he's smothering guys. He's not letting anybody get over the top of him. He's tackling pretty consistently. The only thing that you really wanted to see from him better was sometimes on the underneath stuff, maybe like being a little bit more competitive there. But you'll take that. I'll take a guy giving up curls all day as long as he's not giving up a deep ball and letting somebody get behind him. So it's tough to say how he can really improve because it was so early on in his career. And he won Defensive Rookie of the Month. So, he wasn't exactly a slouch. He was doing pretty well there. But I guess maybe just consistency and being able to continue to play up to the level that we saw from him early on.
Last question, because one thing that I look forward to when it comes, teams tend to move around, especially if they are trying to either trade up or trade down. And there have been rumblings as to the Patriots potentially trading down out of the number 3. Will it happen? Who knows? We won't know until draft night. But I'll ask you this. I want to loft you one here. So you can hit a home run or you could choose to bunt. Do you foresee the Patriots trading down out of the number 3 spot? Or do you foresee them staying at 3rd overall and making their selection?
I think they stay. I don't know if that's bunt, but
That's a swing for the fences.
I think they know they need a quarterback, and especially with all the rumblings about Jaden Daniels, like you're hearing Adam Schefter and Colin Cowherd. Now, Colin Cowherd, it's not the most believable source necessarily, considering that Adam Schefter is just on a totally different plane. But when Adam Schefter says something and he stands on business about it, I listen. Because he's usually obviously he's one of the most locked in people in our business, but he has been adamant that the Commanders are probably going to take Jaden Daniels. So if Drake May's on the board, he's young, he's super talented, he clearly cares. I know there's been some talk about like he is kind of just like that Southern kid where a little bit pie in the sky, super optimistic, and he's just loving life. Something wrong with that. But Dane Brugler also mentioned that from what he's heard that there is belief that like eventually Drake May can grow into that leadership role. And, Tom Brady wasn't that guy from year one either. Like he was vocal and he, was trying to make sure that he could command the team when it was called upon. But nobody was really expecting nothing from Tom Brady in his second season when he took over for Drew Bledsoe. Different situation with May where he's coming in with expectations, but you're hoping the veterans in your locker room will be able to take the brunt of that. And then as Drake learns, and, especially with someone like Jacoby Brissett, like he can be that guy where he's more the leader in the locker room and at the quarterback position, whether or not he's the one playing, with the understanding that, Drake's going to need some time. But I think if May's there, you stand pat, you take him. Even if JJ McCarthy's your guy, that's where I'd kind of like to see them maybe trade out, then trade back into the top 5 and get him, because I don't want to risk losing him, because I like Penix a lot, but I don't like him being a franchise guy for a team like this. So, yeah, I think the Patriots are going to stay put. Fingers crossed if May is there, they just don't overthink it and take him and then develop him and work out some of the kinks in his game. But I just don't really see the value in trading back when you need a quarterback as badly as they do.
Before I finally sign off on this episode of the podcast, apparently there's a clip that is floating around Twitter today. Maybe you've seen it, maybe you haven't. But Vic the barber, who's done phenomenal work on social media, who's become well known worldwide for his haircuts. Giving haircuts to either celebrities or just like random people in the street. He had the chance to speak with Tom Brady, who he gave a haircut to, And in that clip, Vic asked Tom this question. He asked him, would you be opposed to coming back if a team called?
Yeah.
And he said that he wouldn't be opposed to it if the Patriots or someone were to call. And I'm just like, well, then, okay. So, do you foresee any way in God's green earth that Tom Brady actually does come back, given that he's been out of the NFL for a couple of years now?
No, no, that'd be crazy. This team is not. I couldn't see Tom coming back to a team that's not ready to compete legitimately for a Super Bowl. Obviously, he elevates the talent around him in a way that nobody else has or maybe ever will. But that would make absolutely no sense to me. I know he loves the Patriots, but yeah, that'd be a little bonkers. I don't see any reason why he would come back to New England.
Like that I had to ask because that video is legitimately in fact, I'm going to send you the video so you could actually take a look at it for yourself and see like to see where I'm coming from. Because it's crazy the question, because personally I don't think he does, but it was like the fact that that was even asked, but Tom Brady's response alone left that proverbial crack in the door. Like, yeah, maybe I do, if maybe, but I won't be opposed to it. It's like, really? Okay.
I'll believe it when I see it. I'll say that. I'll believe it when I see it.
But to wrap up the episode, I want to say thank you Taylor for coming on the podcast on the Hub of Champions. Thank you. Keep up the phenomenal work that you do covering the Patriots for CLNS. We can check out his work on CLNS.com, especially as we are getting closer and closer to the NFL draft. Exactly 2 weeks from today. Shukri Wright signing off. Thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.